Start again. This lesson is going to be on thinking errors, the building blocks of faulty behavior. Thinking errors really are the ABCs of emotional health. If you don't understand thinking errors, you really don't understand how to change your behavior. This is also called cognitive distortions, maladaptive thinking. Sometimes, even with children and working with them, it's been called stinking thinking. But really, this is something that if you understand and you understand what the thinking errors are, you can make some real changes in your behavior. Now, this allows us to rationalize our behavior, to justify our behavior. You need to understand this is something that we all do. Now, what I know is that many of us will find some of our favorites. And what I've also done is I've taken the 35 plus thinking errors that are out there and I've distilled it down to the ones that we typically use when we have anxiety or depression. And so we're going to go over some of those. First one we're going to talk about is personalization. So I'm just going to read through the definition and talk a little bit more about them. When a person attributes an external event to himself when there's actually no causal relationship. Example, if a checkout clerk is rude to you and you believe that you must have done something that caused it when you may have done nothing at all. Another example I like to share with this is kind of the classic high school situation. Picture yourself back in high school. You're walking down a hallway and you see a friend coming up towards you down the hallway. You look at your friend kind of has this distant, a little bit of a frustrated look in their face, and you say hi to them. And when you say hi, they don't even look at you. They just keep walking as though you weren't there. What's the first thing that goes through your mind? For a lot of us, it's, gosh, what did I do? How did I upset my friend? In reality, later that day, your friend comes to you and says, hey man, just want you to know, I'm having a bad day. I failed my test, my girlfriend dumped me, parents are getting on my case. And you realize at that point, oh, it was never about me. So this is that personalization piece. We believe, and unfortunately, in a negative way, that anything that happens to us from other people is because of us. Next one I want to talk about is black and white thinking. Okay, this is when we categorize things into one of two extremes. Example, believing that people are either your friend or your enemy. This thinking gets us into a lot of trouble in relationships. This is often a situation where we don't have trust, and so therefore we believe that people, again, are either friend or foe. They're with us or against us. We forget about the gray. And if that's the case, then we don't really give people the benefit of the doubt. And what happens with this as well is we are constantly in that heightened state of alertness and threat appraisal. In other words, every situation and every interaction we have, we're looking to see whether a person's going to hurt us or not. In reality, much like the previous example of personalization, people have many shades of gray. And the things they do aren't always against us. And of course, the key is taking responsibility. Now, as we go through these thinking errors, I want you to realize that we are going to have another course, which we're going to talk about how we change our thinking, how we reconstruct our thoughts. So just know the purpose of this, again, is to help us understand what some of these common thinking errors are that create and continue anxiety. Next one I want to talk about, which I love, which is very common, individuals struggling with anxiety, is feelings are facts. You assume that your negative emotions necessarily reflect the way things really are. I feel it, therefore it must be true. Great example of this is when you wake up in the morning and you're like, man, I'm just too tired to get up and exercise. Or I'm just too overwhelmed to start this project. Or I'm just too embarrassed to go talk to that person. This is when we allow our feelings to prevent us from doing something. Now, again, this doesn't mean that we negate what we're feeling. I mean, we need to recognize those emotions, but we need to use those motivations to motivate us to do something and not let them hijack us. The next one I want to talk about is filter. So when a person makes a judgment based on some information, but disregards other information. Example, when a person attends a party and focuses on one awkward glance and ignores the hours of smiles. So it's almost like, and if you picture this filter with openings in it, it's almost like all we do is we allow the negative to come through, and this filter traps the positive. Again, very, very common with individuals with anxiety and especially depression. It's kind of like the statement that life is what you frame it, right? So basically, life is what you see and what you find. All right, let's talk about labeling. Attaching a label to yourself after a negative experience. Example, feeling awkward at a party leads to the conclusion, I am an awkward person. So basically, we are what we do, or we are what we feel. And if that were the case, then every mistake we've ever made, that's who we are. And that, of course, is not an accurate portrayal of who we are. This is big. We tend to believe that we are pigeonholed into certain labels. And therefore, if that's who we are, we're never moving out of that circle. And so we've got to stop labeling ourselves and also stop judging and labeling others in order to move on. Next one I want to talk about is disqualifying the positive. You dismiss positive experiences by insisting they don't count for some reason or other. And this way you can maintain a negative belief that is contradicted by your everyday experiences. This is much like the one we previously talked about. This is basically just anytime a positive situation comes about, then it doesn't count. That the negative always outweighs the positive. This is a big one, catastrophizing. Taking an event you are concerned about and blowing it out of proportion to the point of becoming fearful. Example, believing that if you fail a quiz, then the teacher will completely lose respect for you, that will not graduate from college, that you will therefore never will get a well-paying job, and will ultimately end up unhappy and dissatisfied with life. This is the classic taking a molehill and turning it into a mountain. When we do this, we of course become overwhelmed, we can't move forward, and we always ask ourselves, why try? Okay, so now what? We need to understand, first of all, what drives our thoughts, feelings, and behavior. So the point of this lesson is to be able to recognize that these thinking errors are about. And in our lesson 2, where we talk about the catch, challenge, change, you need to recognize this is what you're going to be catching. So we'll reference back to this a little bit later. Appreciate you joining me in this lesson about thinking errors. Again, this is, the title, Building Blocks. This really is. This is the meat and potatoes of being able to make a change in your behavior. First of all, recognizing the statements, the script that you tell yourself. And by recognizing this, then we can move forward and taking the steps to making changes, which we'll talk about in a future lesson. Thanks.